The air was heavy with the acrid smell of gunpowder, a reminder that only minutes ago, this village had been alive with gunfire. Now, silence lingered, thick and suffocating, as if the earth itself held its breath. General Alicia Hart crouched, behind the remnants of a collapsed wall, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She was alone, separated from her unit after a violent burst of enemy fire had driven them apart. She adjusted her rifle strap across her shoulder, the familiar weight grounding her. For a moment, she closed her eyes and inhaled, steadying herself. Fear had no place here. She had led men and women through worse jungles, deserts, mountains, but there was something uniquely unsettling about this village. The silence wasn't peace. It was a trap waiting to spring. The buildings around her stood like broken teeth, charred and fractured from years of conflict. Once, this had been someone's home, filled with laughter, meals, and the hum of ordinary life. Now, it was rubble and shadows, a battlefield reclaimed by death. Every window was a potential sniper's nest. Every corner, a possible ambush. Alicia knew better than to move recklessly. One wrong step could end everything. She pressed her back against the crumbling wall, her mind running through her situation. 6 rounds left. No radio contact. No backup in sight. Her team had been forced to retreat under heavy fire, but she had stayed, holding the rear to buy them time. That decision had left her stranded. Still, there was no regret. A general's duty was to protect her soldiers, even if it meant walking into hell alone. A soft wind stirred dust through the broken streets. Alicia adjusted her scope, peering through the ruined village. She saw no movement, but she could feel eyes watching. It wasn't paranoia, it was experience. The battlefield had a language, and silence was often its loudest warning. Her mind drifted briefly to the path that had brought her here. Years of discipline, of training, of sacrifice. From the first time she had held a rifle as a cadet, she had understood the art of patience. While others rushed, eager for glory, she had learned to wait, to breathe, to trust the rhythm of the shot. That skill had earned her the reputation of being one of the finest snipers in the U.S. Army. But she wasn't here for reputation. She was here for survival. A faint metallic click reached her ears, a careless sound, small but unmistakable. Someone nearby had checked a weapon. Alicia froze, her senses sharpening. She knew now she wasn't imagining it. She wasn't alone. She crouched lower, peeking through a jagged hole in the wall. Movement flickered at the edge of her vision. A shadow slipping between 2 ruined buildings. Then another. And another. They weren't civilians. They weren't her soldiers. These were enemies, moving with practiced caution, tightening a noose around her position. Her pulse quickened, but her breathing remained even. 6 of them, she counted. 6 men, and she had 6 bullets. Alicia's instincts screamed at her to move, to find higher ground, but she resisted. Movement would expose her. Instead, she pulled the rifle into position, the cool metal pressing against her cheek as she scanned her surroundings through the scope. She tracked one figure, then another. They were fanning out, trying to surround her, unaware that she already had them in her sights. The general weighed her options carefully. She could attempt to sneak away, slipping through the rubble to regroup with her team. But that would mean leaving the village unsecured, allowing these fighters to regroup and hunt her people. That wasn't an option. She had been entrusted with command for a reason. This wasn't just survival. It was duty. Her finger brushed the trigger lightly, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Patience was her greatest weapon. Let them believe she was cornered. Let them step into the kill zone. The silence deepened again, broken only by the crunch of boots on gravel. They were close now. Too close. Alicia closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She remembered her father's voice, a memory from childhood. In chaos, breathe steady, one shot at a time. Those words had carried her through every battle, and now they guided her once more. She opened her eyes. The hunter was ready. From her position, she could see the first enemy clearly. He carried a grenade launcher, his arrogance obvious in the careless way he moved, convinced she was helpless. He was wrong. He would be her first target. But for now, Alicia remained still, hidden by the ruins, her body pressed low, her rifle steady. She knew that once the first shot rang out, there would be no turning back. It would be her against 6 men, a deadly dance in which hesitation meant death. Her hand tightened around the rifle grip. Her heartbeat slowed. The silence of the battlefield had transformed. It was no longer suffocating. Now it was her ally. The general wasn't afraid of silence. She owned it. Time seemed to stretch. The enemies closed in, their voices carrying faintly as they whispered. Orders. She could almost hear their confidence. To them, this was already over a single woman, cut off from her unit, surrounded. They didn't know her. They didn't understand the years of discipline etched into her very bones. Alicia inhaled deeply, steady and slow. 6 bullets. 6 enemies. That was enough. She shifted her rifle slightly, aligning her scope with the man holding the grenade launcher. Through the glass, she could see his face clearly. He was young, maybe too young, his jaw set with false bravado. Her finger hovered over the trigger, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could end him now, but timing mattered. Each shot had to be more than precise. It had to be perfect. She waited. The silence pressed tighter. A trap nearly sprung. The general exhaled. The battle hadn't begun yet, but Alicia Hart knew it was already hers. The crunch of gravel echoed like a thunderclap in the silence. Alicia's eyes snapped to the sound, every nerve alive. She lowered her scope a fraction, focusing on the narrow alley between 2 collapsed buildings. A shadow moved, then another. Shapes emerged, cautious at first, then bolder. 6 of them. They weren't scattered like scavengers. No, they moved with intent, disciplined in their approach, each man scanning a sector, rifles ready. These weren't amateurs. They had done this before. Predators, circling prey. Alicia's lips pressed into a thin line. She shifted her weight slightly, pressing her shoulder deeper into the crumbled stone of her cover. From where she sat, she had a limited line of sight. If she fired too soon, she'd give away her position before she was ready. But if she waited too long, they'd flush her out like game. Her mind ticked through scenarios. The village's ruins created a labyrinth of narrow passages, dead ends, and broken courtyards. It was the perfect hunting ground for an ambush, and right now she was the one being hunted. The fighters fanned out, communicating in low voices. One climbed atop a collapsed roof to gain higher ground. Another slid into position behind a burnt-out vehicle. The rest spread into a loose semicircle, tightening their net. From their perspective, Alicia was just one woman with no backup. A general, yes, but generals bled like anyone else. Their smirks and easy movements betrayed their confidence. They thought the battle was already won. Alicia adjusted her grip on her rifle. Her pulse was steady, her breathing even. Outwardly, she was a statue hidden in shadow. Inwardly, her mind was a storm of calculations. Angles, distances, wind drift, cover points. 6 enemies, 6 bullets. But she wasn't rushing. She knew the battlefield rewarded patience. One of the men whistled softly, a mocking sound. Another chuckled in response. Their voices carried across the empty street, low and taunting. "She's trapped," one said in accented English. "No way out." A second voice, colder, sharper. "Careful. She's dangerous." Dangerous. Alicia almost smiled. At least, one of them understood. She shifted her weight, inching her rifle's barrel through a narrow gap in the wall. Her eye returned to the scope. Through it, the world sharpened into detail. Cracks in the enemy's rifle stock, sweat glistening on a brow, the faint rise and fall of a chest under tactical webbing. The grenade launcher still stood out to her, its carrier moving with a swagger that spoke of overconfidence. He was the threat that could end her fight instantly. He would be the first to go. But not yet. Timing was everything. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crunch of boots and the creak of shifting rubble. Alicia's body tensed with every sound, but her mind remained cold, detached. Fear was acknowledged, then pushed aside. She had been here before. Afghanistan, Iraq, hidden in mountains, crouched in jungles. She knew the rhythm of an ambush, the way it swelled before it broke, and she knew how to break it first. Her fingers flexed slightly, brushing the trigger guard. Not yet, not until the odds shifted. One of the fighters suddenly raised his hand, signaling to the others. They froze. Then slowly, they began to close in tighter, rifles lifting, barrels pointed toward her cover. The trap was about to spring. Alicia's mind snapped into clarity. She imagined the battlefield as a chessboard, each enemy a piece moving into position. But she wasn't playing defense. She was setting the board for her own strike. She inhaled deeply, her lungs filling with the dust-thick air. Her heartbeat slowed. The world around her quieted until all she heard was the faint rustle of boots and the soft rasp of her own breath. This was the moment. Her scope found the grenade carrier again. His head turned briefly, exposing the perfect angle. Her finger settled on the trigger. But just as she prepared to fire, another sound reached her ears, a faint shuffle of rubble directly behind her. Her blood chilled. Someone had slipped around the ruins faster than she'd anticipated. The enemy was smarter than she thought. They weren't just tightening the circle. They were probing for weakness. And now, one of them was directly at her back. Alicia froze, her instincts screaming. She could feel him, close enough that she imagined she could hear his breathing. She slid her hand slowly toward her sidearm, careful not to make noise. One misstep and the ambush would collapse on her before she fired a single shot. Then, from behind, a voice hissed in broken English. "Drop it, now." The order was sharp, confident. He thought he had her. Alicia's mind raced. If she turned, she'd be riddled with bullets from the rest of the circle. If she dropped her rifle, she'd lose her best chance of survival. Options, always options. Her eyes flicked back through her scope. The grenade carrier was still in her sights, oblivious to his comrade's position. She tightened her finger on the trigger. The rifle cracked like thunder. The grenade carrier dropped instantly, his body collapsing in a cloud of dust. At the same moment, Alicia twisted, her sidearm flashing from its holster. She fired blind behind her, 2 rapid shots. A grunt of pain confirmed her instincts. The man who had crept up on her staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Not dead, but wounded. The ambush erupted. Shouts in a foreign tongue rang out as the fighters scrambled, diving for cover. Muzzle flashes lit up the ruins as bullets tore into the wall shielding Alicia. Stone chips flew, dust clouding the air, but Alicia was already moving. She rolled out from behind the crumbled wall, sliding into a new position behind a burnt-out car. Her rifle snapped up, scope already finding. Another target. 1 against 6. The fight had begun. The world became chaos. Bullets zipped overhead, slamming into stone and metal. The air filled with the metallic stink of gunfire. Alicia kept low, moving with fluid precision, every step calculated. Another enemy leaned out from cover, spraying wildly. Alicia's rifle arced in response. He crumpled, lifeless, four left. Her training carried her now, muscle memory guiding every action. The battlefield narrowed until it was just her rifle, and the next target. Her calm in the storm made her deadly. But the enemies weren't giving up easily. They knew they still outnumbered her. They just didn't know numbers weren't enough. The gunfire had slowed, replaced by the eerie stillness of men regrouping. Dust drifted in the sunlight like smoke, settling on broken walls and shattered ground. Alicia crouched behind the rusted skeleton of the car, her rifle snug against her shoulder, her ears tuned to the whispers of movement. Her breath was steady, her hands calm, her mind razor sharp. She had learned long ago that fear never truly disappeared. It simply became manageable. She could feel its edges in her chest, a quickening, a tremor at the edge of instinct. But she had trained to bend fear into focus, to turn it into a weapon. Fear sharpened awareness. Fear kept her alive. Now it whispered in her ear, 6 against 1. 6 rifles, 6 sets of eyes, 6 chances for death. And yet, Alicia's heart didn't feel like prey. She felt like the storm waiting to be unleashed. Her mind drifted, even as her eyes scanned the ruins for movement. Memories of long nights' training returned, the endless drills, the repetition, until muscle and breath became one. One shot at a time, one breath at a time. She remembered her early years at the military academy, when she first proved her eye was sharper than anyone else's. Instructors would pit cadets against one another at the sniper range, and Alicia's bullet holes always clustered so tightly that her targets looked like they had been punctured with a single round. Patience is your gift, her instructor had once told her. Other soldiers fight the enemy. You fight time itself, and time bends to you. That patience had saved her life countless times. The echoes of battle tugged at another memory, Afghanistan. Years earlier, she and her spotter had been pinned on a ridgeline by insurgent fire. 2 hours they had remained still, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The sun had burned her skin, sweat dripping into her eyes, but she hadn't moved. And when the moment came, when her target stepped into the open, she fired a shot that ended the ambush before it began. Her spotter had whispered in awe, "Your ice, heart, pure ice." Now, crouched in the ruins of this village, she called, on that same icy discipline. A flicker of movement snapped her back to the present. Across the street, behind a jagged wall, one of the fighters peeked out, scanning for her. His movements were jerky, nervous. The overconfidence from earlier was gone. She had already cut down 2 of their men, and their certainty was bleeding away. Alicia lined up her shot. Inhale, exhale, pause, squeeze. The rifle barked, and the fighter dropped, his weapon clattering against the stone. 3 left. The crack of her shot echoed, but Alicia didn't stay put. She rolled to her side, sliding behind another patch of cover. A sniper who remained stationary after firing was already dead. Her body moved automatically, flowing with a rhythm of survival. Bullets peppered the car she had just abandoned, sparks and fragments flying. The enemy was firing blind, striking ghosts. She was already gone. As she crawled into her new position, her thoughts sharpened. Numbers didn't matter anymore. 6 had become 3, and soon 3 would become none. But Alicia's resolve wasn't born only from training. It was born from why she fought. She thought of her unit, the men and women who had trusted her, leadership who had looked to her for protection. She thought of the rookies under her command, some barely out of their teens, following her into war with wide eyes and raw courage. If she fell here, the message would ripple through her ranks like poison. Their general could be cornered, broken, destroyed. That could not happen. She would not let fear infect them. She carried their morale as much as she carried her rifle. I am their shield, she reminded herself. If I fall, the shield breaks. If I stand, they stand with me. That thought was her anchor. That thought made her stronger. A burst of enemy gunfire rattled nearby. Alicia ducked lower, shards of stone, raining down as bullets chipped away at her cover. The men shouted to one another, trying to flush her out, trying to reclaim the dominance they had lost. She could almost hear their desperation. The rhythm of hunters had become the rhythm of prey. One of them shouted, his voice trembling, "She's alone, take her." But even as he tried to summon courage, Alicia heard the cracks in his resolve. He wasn't convincing himself. He was lying to his comrades, lying to himself. Alicia's eyes narrowed. She angled her rifle through a broken hole in the wall and waited. Sure enough, the man leaned out, firing wildly, too exposed. She squeezed the trigger. His body jerked backward, crumpling in silence. Two left. The village seemed to grow quieter with every shot she fired. For Alicia, the battlefield was no longer chaos. It was a chessboard, and she was 3 moves ahead. Her hands moved with the grace of routine, sliding another round into the chamber. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, steady, unhurried. Her father's voice whispered again in memory. In chaos, breathe steady, one shot at a time. She lived by those words now. Every exhale was a prayer. Every pull of the trigger, a promise. She thought of him then, her father, a military man himself, who had drilled her not only in shooting, but in character. He had taught her that leadership wasn't standing above others, but kneeling beside them, carrying their burdens, sharing their risks. You will never ask of your soldiers what you won't do yourself, he had told her when she first received her commission. That is the oath of command. That was why she had stayed behind when her unit pulled back. Why? She had chosen to face 6 enemies alone. She couldn't ask them to risk their lives while she ran for safety. Her resolve wasn't just about survival, it was about honor. Another shadow darted across her vision. One of the remaining enemies sprinted from cover, trying to flank her. His desperation made him reckless. Alicia tracked him smoothly, adjusting her aim as he moved. Inhale, exhale, pause, fire. He collapsed mid-stride, skidding across the dirt. One left. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the last fighter seemed frozen, the weight of fear pressing down on him. Alicia scanned carefully, searching for him. He was out there, somewhere in the ruins, realizing too late that the trap he and his comrades had set had become their own. For Alicia, time slowed again. This was the final step. She could feel the end approaching, not with relief, but with focus. She wasn't thinking of rest or safety. She was thinking of precision, of finishing the fight cleanly. The last man fired a desperate burst, bullets shattering stone. Alicia rolled into a crouch, her rifle rising. Through her scope, she caught him. His eyes were wide, his face twisted with panic. Her breath steadied, her finger tightened. And the silence of the battlefield prepared itself for one final echo. The village was still, but the stillness wasn't peace. It was pressure. The kind of pressure that bent walls, that crawled into lungs, that whispered a single truth. The trap was closing. Alicia crouched low, her rifle balanced against the splintered frame of the ruined car. Her eyes scanned the shattered streets, searching for the last figures who hadn't yet fallen. 2 enemies remained. 2 wolves still circling. They were silent now, silent in a way that spoke of fear and cunning both. She could feel it. They weren't charging, weren't reckless like their comrades had been. They had learned. And when enemies learned, they became dangerous. The broken buildings around her seemed to shrink, their jagged edges cutting the sky into slivers. She had cover, Yes, but cover worked both ways. Each collapsed wall, each blackened window, was a place where death could wait, patient and quiet. Alicia's fingers brushed the stone, feeling its roughness, the grit clinging to her gloves. She inhaled, the dust scratching at her throat. Her ammunition was dwindling, only a few rounds remained. Every bullet mattered, she reminded herself. 6 rounds, 6 enemies. The mantra steadied her, anchoring her in the rising storm. Her breathing slowed. Inhale, hold, exhale. Her body became rhythm. Her rifle became extension. She was not trapped. She was waiting. A shadow flickered in the distance, a brief dart across an open alley. Alicia's scope swung toward it, tracking, but the enemy was already gone. He was smart enough not to linger, smart enough to use the ruins as his ally. Then another sound reached her light, almost imperceptible. The scrape of a boot on loose stone. Not far, closer than she expected. The realization pressed in on her like a weight. They weren't retreating. They were stalking her, narrowing the circle step by step, moving unseen. The trap was tightening. Alicia slid backward, low to the ground, her body pressed into the dust. She shifted behind another wall, careful not to expose herself. Her rifle remained steady, the scope darting from shadow to shadow. She had been in situations like this before. She remembered a night in Kandahar, when insurgents had hunted her teen through a maze of narrow alleys. The air then had been just as heavy, the silence just as sharp. She remembered the lesson that night had taught her. When the enemy pressed in, the battlefield itself became her weapon. That thought steadied her. This ruined village wasn't a cage. It was a chessboard, and she was still moving the pieces. Her mind sharpened, cataloging everything: the positions of rubble piles, the collapsed beams, the angle of sunlight slicing through dust. The battlefield spoke a language, and Alicia knew how to read it. She imagined the paths her enemies would take, the blind spots they thought safe, the corners they would hug. She could see them in her head before they moved, as though she was already there, waiting for them. The tightening trap no longer felt suffocating. It felt inevitable for them. Still, the pressure built. Her body was tense, adrenaline surging. Sweat clung beneath her collar, trickling down her neck. Every muscle wanted to move, to fight, to end it. But discipline held her. She remembered her training. Patience kills more enemies than bullets. Her father's words echoed again. In chaos, breathe steady. The first to panic is the first to die. She wasn't panicking. She was patient. The silence broke. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the ruins, shooing into the car she had abandoned earlier. Stone shattered, metal screamed. The enemies were testing, probing, trying to flush her into the open. Alicia didn't move. Let them waste their fire. Let them reveal themselves. When the shots stopped, the dust swirled, curling in shafts of sunlight. Alicia's scope cut through it, hunting. She saw him, a man crouched low behind a half-fallen wall, his barrel still smoking. She exhaled, calm as a stone. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked. The man slumped. One left. The village seemed to inhale with her. Silence fell heavier than before, draping the ruins in tension. Only one enemy remained now. But Alicia knew the last man would be the most dangerous. Fear made people reckless, but desperation made them cunning. She shifted her position again, crawling into a darker corner, her back pressed against a cool stone wall. She listened. The battlefield spoke in whispers. The faint scrape of cloth, the distant shift of rubble, the ghost of breathing where there should be none. He was close. Memories flickered again, nights of crawling through mud during training. Her instructors. Screaming above her, smoke grenades clouding vision, explosions shaking the earth. She had learned to find stillness then, to let the world rage while her mind remained untouched. That stillness filled her now. The enemy thought he was the predator, but Alicia was already in his shadow, already predicting his every move. She whispered to herself, so softly no one else could hear. One shot at a time. The last man made his move. A sudden shuffle of boots, the flash of a figure darting from cover, rifle raised. He shouted as he charged, desperate to break the stalemate. His footsteps thundered across the broken stones, his barrel spitting fire. Alicia rolled, swift and controlled, her body reacting before thought. Her scope rose, caught his chest, tracked upward in one fluid motion. Inhale, hold, exhale, squeeze. The rifle cracked. The enemy stumbled mid-charge, momentum carrying him. A step forward before he collapsed into the dust. His rifle clattered away. Silence fell once more, absolute and final. Alicia remained still, her rifle trained on the fallen figure for a long moment. She didn't trust silence until it proved itself. Slowly she stood, her knees stiff from crouching. She scanned the ruins again, scope sweeping the streets. Nothing moved. No voices whispered. The trap was broken. Her shoulders eased slightly, though not with relief. Victory didn't bring comfort. It brought awareness, the knowledge that she had survived only because discipline held, only because patience ruled. The battlefield tightened on her, but she had tightened faster. She lowered her rifle and breathed deeply. The dust still tasted of smoke. The silence still weighed heavy, but her resolve stood unshaken. This village had not been her cage. It had been her crucible, and she had emerged stronger. The battlefield was breathing again, slow, ragged, uncertain. Alicia crouched low, her rifle cradled steady against her shoulder, the metallic chill of its frame grounding her. Her ears rang faintly from the last exchange, but silence had returned, broken only by the moaning creak of a roof beam somewhere in the ruins. And yet, beneath that silence, she felt it, the tension of men preparing to strike again. Her rifle's chamber was loaded. Her mind was sharp. One round ready, one decision waiting. It was time. The grenade launcher weighed heavy on her thoughts. Of all the weapons her enemies carried, that single tube was the most devastating. A single well-placed round could obliterate her cover, shred stone into shrapnel, end her fight in one deafening instant. Through her scope, she found him again, the man carrying it. He wasn't hiding, not like the others. His posture was cocky, his grin cruel. He moved with the swagger of someone who believed himself invincible, believing that the explosion he carried was a guaranteed victory. Alicia studied him carefully. His finger tapped the launcher's grip absent-mindedly as he whispered something to his comrade. His head tilted back, teeth flashing in a brief laugh. Overconfidence, always fatal. She shifted her aim slightly, steadying the reticle just above the line of his eye. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Her finger pressed lightly on the trigger, feeling the familiar curve of cold metal. Her heartbeat slowed to a crawl. The village seemed to fade away. No dust, no ruins, no sky. Only the scope. Only the target. Her father's words hummed in her memory, a rhythm she'd carried for years. One shot at a time. It wasn't just advice. It was doctrine. Time bent with her breath. She squeezed. The rifle cracked like thunder, a sound that ripped through the stillness and echoed off shattered walls. Her target's head snapped back. His body fell like a puppet with its strings cut, the grenade launcher slipping from limp fingers, clattering across the stone. Dust puffed as he hit the ground. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then chaos erupted. The men shouted in alarm, their voices sharp and panicked. Boots pounded against stone as they dove for cover, their earlier laughter erased, her confidence. Shattered, Alicia didn't flinch. She had already shifted, sliding behind new rubble, chambering her next round. She knew the rules of sniping. Fire, move, vanish. A stationary sniper was a dead sniper. Shards of rock sprayed as bullets slammed into her previous position. Too late, she was already gone. Her breathing remained calm, her hands moving with machine-like precision. She rolled into her new cover and adjusted her scope, scanning. One man was crouched behind a collapsed doorway, his eyes wild, scanning the ruins with jerky movements. His hands shook as he clutched his rifle too tightly, finger twitching on the trigger. Fear had entered the circle. Alicia tracked him, but didn't fire yet. Not until she was ready. Not until it was certain. The memory of her first kill in combat returned suddenly, unbidden. Years ago, in a desert valley, she had watched a man through her scope for 20 minutes before squeezing the trigger. She had been young then, still untested. The shot had ended a life, but it had also transformed hers. That night, her spotter had asked if she felt guilt. Alicia hadn't answered right away. Later, she realized it wasn't guilt she carried, it was weight. The weight of choice, of knowing when to fire and when to hold. Now, crouched in the ruins of this broken village, she carried that same weight, but it didn't bow her. It steeled her. Another enemy shifted position, sprinting across an exposed alley to reinforce his comrade. Alicia's scope found him in mid-stride, her breathing synced with his movement. Inhale as he ran. Exhale as he slowed near cover. She squeezed. The shot cracked, and the man pitched forward, skidding into the dust. Shouts followed: anger, fear, desperation. 2 down since the first shot. The battlefield was already changing. The survivors fired blindly, their bullets raking the ruins, striking stone and air. Alicia ducked, dust raining down on her helmet. But she didn't panic. Panic was the ally of death. She shifted again, crawling along the debris-strewn ground, her knees scraping against gravel. She found a new vantage point behind a crumbled stairwell, her scope rising once more. Through the sight, the ruins looked different angles sharper. Colors faded, but her targets were clear. One crouched too long in the same spot, his shoulders trembling. Another's barrel poked too far around cover, betraying his position. Mistakes, small but fatal. Alicia's chest rose and fell, measured, and even. She was in the rhythm now. The battlefield no longer felt overwhelming. It was quiet, controlled, hers. She whispered softly, a ritual only she could hear. 1 breath, 1 shot. Her fingers squeezed. The man with the trembling shoulders collapsed, his rifle clattering to the ground. 3 left. The others shouted louder now, their fear masked by aggression. They tried to coordinate, tried to regain control, but Alicia could hear it in their voices, the cracks, the hesitation. One voice barked orders, but his words overlapped with another, confusion breaking their rhythm. Alicia's lips pressed. Thin, they weren't a unit anymore. They were individuals clinging to survival. She scanned again, her scope gliding across shadows. The sun had shifted slightly, stretching the ruins into longer silhouettes. Dust hung heavier now, disturbed by gunfire. Her eye narrowed as she tracked movement one of the men crawling along the edge of a wall, trying to flank her. Her scope found him, his body pressed low, his rifle awkward as he scuttled forward. Inhale, hold, exhale. The shot split the silence. His body jerked, then stilled. The battlefield grew quiet again. Only 2 remained now, their numbers dwindling like sand through an hourglass. Alicia felt no triumph, only focus. This wasn't about pride. It was about survival, about duty. Her mind stayed anchored in the rhythm, in the calm. She didn't think of death. She thought of precision. And precision was her dominion. From somewhere in the ruins, a cry echoed angry, mournful, defiant. One of the survivors had seen his comrade fall. He screamed something in his language, his voice breaking. Then bullets tore across the street, furious but aimless. Alicia stayed low, her rifle steady. She didn't waste ammunition on emotion. Rage made her enemies sloppy. Patience would finish them. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Her breath filled her lungs, slow and even. She could almost hear her father again. One shot at a time, Alicia. Never more, never less. When she opened them, her scope was already rising, her body steady, her hands certain. The battlefield waited. The ruins listened. And Alicia's heart prepared her next shot. The first had already broken their will. The rest would end it. The battlefield had shrunk into rhythm. Each breath, each trigger squeeze, each fall of an enemy. What began as 6 predators circling her had become a dwindling storm. And yet, even as their numbers collapsed, Alicia's heart felt the pressure deepen. The fewer they became, the more desperate they grew. 2 were gone already. 4 remained. 4 pairs of eyes searching for one soldier. But Alicia wasn't simply surviving. She was reshaping the fight. The ruins shifted with sound-shouted orders, gunfire snapping against stone, boots scraping. Grit. They thought their volume would corner her, rattle her, force her to break cover. Instead, it betrayed them. Their panic echoed, bouncing from wall to wall, revealing positions with every cry. Alicia crouched lower, rifle balanced against a crumbled stairwell. Her breathing was steady, chest rising like tide against the weight of dust. Through her scope, she saw movement. A flash of a barrel, the arc of a helmet ducking back behind. Stone. She did not rush. She never rushed. Patience kills more enemies than bullets. One of the men tried flanking again, creeping across rubble with his rifle tight. He thought himself clever, pressing low, hugging shadow. Alicia tracked him through her scope, her reticle gliding across his crawling form like a hunter's gaze. Her breath slowed. Inhale, hold, exhale. The trigger broke. The bullet tore through him. His body folded mid-step, sprawling lifeless against the dust. 3 left. Shouts erupted. One man cursed furiously, spraying wildfire across the ruins. Bullets pinged against metal, ricocheted off walls, sent sparks skittering. Alicia ducked as shards stung her cheek. But her pulse didn't spike. She knew wildfire. It was theater, not war. She waited until the magazine emptied itself in a pathetic final clatter. Then silence again. Silence heavy with dread. They didn't know where she was. That was the power of her movement, her discipline. She fired and vanished, a ghost inside the ruins. And ghosts were unkillable. She shifted, crawling deeper into shadow, rifle tight against her chest. Her knees scraped against. Grit, but her body moved fluid, every motion deliberate. She found new ground behind a collapsed doorway, scope angled low. She spotted another. This one was trembling, his rifle twitching in his hands as his head darted side to side. He whispered something under his breath, words of fear or prayer. Alicia couldn't tell. He exposed himself for just a second too long. Her shot snapped, precise, final. His whisper ended mid-syllable. 2 left. The battlefield exhaled. The last 2 survivors weren't soldiers anymore. They were hunted men. She could feel it in the frantic tone of their voices, the stumbling shuffle of their boots. Once they had been confident, 6 predators tightening a trap. Now they were. Prey tearing at the cage bars. Alicia rose slightly, scanning. The sun had shifted higher, casting longer shadows. Dust swirled in shafts of light, painting the ruins with shifting ghosts. Through her scope, she caught movement two men together, now sticking close, covering each other in desperation. Her lips pressed into a thin line. They had finally adapted, staying united. It would make them harder to isolate, but not impossible. She steadied herself, letting her breath match the rhythm of her heartbeat. She thought of every hour on the range, every grueling crawl through mud, every target she had studied until it blurred into instinct. This was the culmination. This was why she had endured. Her reticle steadied on the nearer of the two. The man leaned out slightly, scanning, his head exposed. Her finger curled, soft and certain. The rifle cracked. The man spun, falling into his comrade's arms. Blood sprayed across rubble. The last soldier screamed, clutching his dying brother in arms, his voice raw, ragged with grief. He fired blindly into the ruins, screaming her name though he could never have known it. Alicia stayed calm, motionless. She did not answer. The battlefield answered for her. The last man's screams broke into sobs, his rifle clattering empty. He staggered, torn between vengeance and despair. He turned in circles, searching shadows, finding none. Through her scope, Alicia watched him unravel. This was the moment discipline demanded the most. A reckless soldier might fire now, end it quickly. But Alicia waited, silent, letting the enemy's mind fracture. She whispered to herself, "In chaos, breathe steady." Her reticle settled over his chest. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. The rifle cracked. For the final time, the last soldier crumpled, silence swallowing his scream. The battlefield fell still. The 6 who had trapped her lay scattered across the ruins, their weapons silent, their voices gone. The air hung heavy with dust and death. Alicia remained crouched, her rifle raised, eyes scanning. She didn't celebrate. She didn't breathe relief. A sniper knew the danger of assuming victory too soon. Only after a long, careful silence did she finally lower her weapon. She had come into their trap, and she had left none of them alive. Her body trembled faintly now, the adrenaline ebbing. Sweat slicked her collar, and her breath came deeper, heavier. She sat back against the wall, rifle across her knees, letting the silence settle over her. She thought of her comrades, still out there fighting. She thought of her father's words. She thought of the 6 enemies who had believed themselves hunters, now nothing but shadows and dust. It wasn't triumph she felt. It wasn't even relief. It was weight, the same weight she had carried since her first kill years ago. The weight of choice. The ruins seemed smaller now, the sunlight dimmer. Alicia closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. She wasn't trapped anymore. She had taken the trap and broken it, piece by piece, shot by shot. When she opened her eyes again, the battlefield was still. The silence was hers. And Alicia Hart General, sniper, survivor rose from the ruins as the last living figure, steady and unshaken. The echoes of gunfire had faded into the dust. The ruins were still, but the weight of the fight hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Alicia Hart lowered her rifle slowly, scanning the battlefield one last time. 6 bodies lay scattered. Across shattered streets, the remnants of a trap that had nearly claimed her. Each figure was frozen mid-motion, a testament to her precision and discipline. The adrenaline in her veins began to ebb, leaving her muscles stiff and aching. She rose slowly, dust slipping from her fatigues, stones crunching beneath her boots. Her chest rose and fell, steady, though deep lines of tension were etched into her face. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had just occurred. She was alive, and she had survived alone against 6 trained enemies. This silence was almost unbearable. The village seemed to hold its breath, the ruined walls leaning in, listening to the lone figure who had conquered its shadows. Birds stirred, hesitant, as if unsure whether the danger had passed. The wind carried the acrid smell of smoke, gunpowder, and earth torn apart. Alicia walked carefully among the rubble, her rifle held loosely at her side. She checked each fallen enemy with methodical precision, ensuring that none remained a threat. Some were young, barely more than boys, caught in the machinery of war and deception. Others carried the confidence of seasoned fighters, believing themselves untouchable until they fell. She didn't warn them, nor did she celebrate. She acknowledged the lives extinguished as the consequence of choices, for better or worse. Her thoughts drifted to her soldiers, those who had been forced to retreat under fire. Where were they now? Were they regrouping? Had anyone fallen? The questions gnawed at her, as always, because a commander never rests while those under her command remain in danger. She moved to a vantage point atop a partially collapsed wall, scanning the horizon. The ruined village stretched in jagged lines beneath her, shadows cast long by the afternoon sun. The battlefield was silent, but the echoes of its fury were etched into every wall, every stone. Alicia crouched there for long moments, letting her mind unwind. Her thoughts were not of triumph, but of consequence. Every shot fired had been necessary, every decision weighed carefully against survival and duty. Yet the reality remained. She had killed 6 people in less than an hour. A faint sound drew her attention. Gravel shifted, soft footsteps approaching. Her rifle snapped into position instinctively, though her movements were calm, controlled. A group of her soldiers emerged from the far edge of the village, faces grim, relief and awe mingling in their eyes. They paused, taking in the scene before them. 6 fallen enemies, ruined walls, and the general who had emerged unscathed, rifle at the ready, every motion disciplined and purposeful. The soldiers exchanged glances, disbelief and admiration evident. One of them finally spoke, voice trembling. "General, we thought you were lost." Alicia lowered her rifle, her expression unreadable. She nodded once, quietly, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. Words were unnecessary. The scene itself told the story. The soldiers approached, checking the perimeter, while Alicia surveyed the ruin. She felt the familiar tug of responsibility. Survival was not enough. She needed to ensure the area was secure, that no threats remained to harm her unit. Methodically, she scanned every alley, every shadow, ensuring that all angles were accounted for. Once satisfied, she allowed herself a brief respite. She crouched against a wall, letting her rifle rest across her knees. Dust clung to her skin, sweat streaked her face, and fatigue settled in her muscles like a heavy cloak. But despite the exhaustion, there was clarity. She had survived, and she had done so through discipline, focus, and unwavering resolve. Alicia's thoughts drifted back to the moments before the first shot, the tension, the anticipation, the sheer pressure of knowing that a single mistake could mean death. She relived the breath, the scope alignment, the click of the trigger. That first shot had been the turning point. It had transformed the battlefield from a trap into a controlled space, one she dominated. Each subsequent shot had reinforced that dominance until silence reclaimed the ruins. She allowed herself to feel the significance. Not pride, exactly. Not satisfaction, but awareness. The knowledge that she had turned a nearly hopeless situation into a testament to skill, patience, and courage. Her gaze shifted to the last of the fallen enemies. He had been the final one, the one who had tried to flee, desperate, broken by fear and the loss of his comrades. His body lay twisted in the dust, rifle empty, face pale with terror that had lasted only seconds before death claimed him. Alicia. felt a hollow echo of something human stir within her. She had killed to survive, yes, but she was acutely aware that war demanded more than survival. It demanded calculation, composure, and sometimes the courage to do what others could not. The silence of the battlefield was not a reward. It was a reminder. Her soldiers gathered near her, murmuring among themselves. Their eyes kept returning to her, the general who had faced 6 enemies alone and lived. They would carry this memory, this lesson, for the rest of their service. Leaders like Alicia Hart were rare, individuals who not only survived the storm, but reshaped it to their advantage. She finally spoke, voice low and even. Check the perimeter. Watch your angles. Nothing moves until we move. We leave no one behind. Her orders were precise, unhesitating. They were received in silence, respected because every word carried weight born of experience. The wind stirred again, lifting dust and debris into the air. Alicia closed her eyes briefly, letting the sounds of the ruined village wash over her. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was reflective, a canvas upon which the events of the battle were etched. She thought of the first shot. She thought of the discipline that had allowed her to survive. She thought of the responsibility she carried, not only for herself, but for those she led. Leadership was measured not by orders given, but by lives, preserved by the courage to act decisively when hesitation meant death. Her mind wandered, briefly, to the broader scope of her life. The years of training, the early missions, the mentors who had shaped her skill, the countless drills that had honed patience and precision. All of it had led to this day, this battle, this moment of solitary triumph amid ruins. A soft cry from one of her soldiers broke her reverie. He knelt by a fallen comrade, checking for life. Alicia moved to join him, scanning for residual threats even as she approached. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder, guiding his attention. The soldier's eyes met hers, wide with awe and respect, and he nodded silently. Her presence alone steadied them. She had fought not only to survive, but to show them how to face danger with clarity, composure, and courage. The battlefield, once chaotic, had become a classroom, each fallen enemy a lesson etched in dust. Alicia understood that this was the legacy of action, the proof that skill, patience, and resolve could shape outcomes even when odds were overwhelming. Hours seemed to pass, though the sun had barely shifted. Alicia remained vigilant, methodically, checking every shadow, every ruin, every broken wall. Only once she was certain that no threats remained did she allow herself a brief rest. She leaned against a half-collapsed wall, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the horizon. She felt the weight of the fight settle into her bones, fatigue, pressing deep, but she also felt something else, clarity. Survival had been achieved, yes, but more than that, discipline had triumphed over chaos, skill over numbers, resolve over fear. She had faced 6 enemies alone. She had fired 6 perfect shots, and she had lived to witness the silence that followed. The soldiers began to gather, their bearings murmuring in hushed tones, clearly processing what had just occurred. Some of them were shaking, relief and awe mingling. Others kept silent, staring at the ruins as though trying to memorize every angle, every shadow, every lesson. Alicia watched them, her gaze steady. Leadership was not about recognition or praise. It was about presence, action, and example. She had demonstrated all 3, and the echoes of that demonstration would ripple through her unit for years to come. And beyond that, she knew, the story would travel further still. 6 enemies, 1 general, 6 perfect shots. The legend was already taking shape. Even as the dust settled and the village seemed to exhale, Alicia remained alert, aware that the battlefield could shift in an instant. But for now, She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The fight was over, the silence absolute. And in that silence, Alicia Hart understood the truth of her life, her choices, and her legacy. Precision, patience, and resolve could turn even a trap into a triumph. She rose, rifle ready, eyes scanning the horizon, and prepared to lead her soldiers onward. The battlefield was silent, but her story, the legend, was only beginning. The sun was low now, painting the ruins in long golden streaks. Shadows stretched across shattered walls and dust-choked streets. Alicia Hart stood at the center of the battlefield, her rifle slung across her shoulder, her eyes sweeping the desolate landscape. Silence had fallen, but it was no ordinary quiet. It was the silence of respect, of lives spared by discipline, and of a battle remembered in every scar of stone and earth. Her soldiers emerged from the far edges of the village, faces still pale, bodies tense with the residual shock of combat. They had watched their general face 6 enemies alone and emerge unscathed. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a display of skill, patience, and unwavering resolve. Their awe was evident in every glance, every hesitant step closer to her, every whispered comment exchanged between them. Alicia did not smile. She had no need to. Pride was quiet, measured. It lived in survival, in the knowledge that every action taken had been precise, every choice calculated. She moved among her soldiers, checking on each of them, her presence steadying their nerves. Leadership was not a title. It was the weight of responsibility, carried in every decision, every step taken under fire. One of her soldiers, a young man barely 20, stepped forward, voice trembling. "General, we've never seen anything like it. How did you?" Alicia's gaze met his, steady, unwavering. Her voice was calm, authoritative, yet filled with the weight of experience, discipline, patience, focus, and respect for the battlefield. You remember this lesson, not for the kills, but for the control. Control keeps you alive. The young soldier nodded, swallowing hard. He would remember this day for the rest of his service. The ruins stretched out before them, a graveyard of ambition and hubris. 6 men had thought themselves predators, clever hunters preying on a single target. Yet here they lay, undone by patience, precision, and unflinching resolve. Alicia's mind catalogued every detail of the engagement, the angles of fire, the sound of footsteps in dust, the flash of movement before the first shot, the rhythm of survival that carried her through each moment. It was a story she would tell herself often, a lesson etched in memory, a reminder that every moment in life and war demanded awareness and control. She moved toward the last of the ruins, checking for survivors or hidden threats. None remained. Her gaze swept over the landscape, noting every potential danger, every collapsed building, every vantage point where an enemy might have hidden. The battlefield was hers, now not in possession, but in understanding. She had faced 6 trained soldiers alone and emerged unscathed. She had turned their trap into her stage, their numbers into shadows. Her breath slowed, the adrenaline fading, leaving fatigue and clarity in its place. She looked at the sky, streaked with gold and violet, and allowed herself a single moment to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. Her soldiers gathered near her once more, murmuring in hushed tones. Their eyes were wide, their expressions a mixture of relief, admiration, and disbelief. They would carry this memory, this lesson, for years to come. Leaders like Alicia Hart were rare individuals, who not only survived, but reshaped the battlefield with intellect, precision, and courage. Alicia addressed them, voice calm but carrying authority. Remember this, survival is not about luck. It's about awareness, preparation, and patience. Discipline is the difference between life and death. Never forget it. Her words hung in the air, not as rhetoric, but as instruction forged in fire. A soft wind stirred, lifting dust and debris into the fading light. Alicia's gaze drifted over the fallen enemies, the ruined streets, and the scorched remains of the buildings. She thought of the first shot, the one that had turned the tide, the one that had begun the transformation of a trap into triumph. She thought of each subsequent moment, each calculated movement that had carried her safely through chaos. Her reflection was not of glory, but of duty fulfilled. She had survived. She had led. She had proven, once again, that mastery over fear and focus over chaos was the true measure of a soldier. Alicia's soldiers began to organize, tending to minor injuries, collecting weapons, and securing the perimeter. Their voices were low, cautious, but their spirits had lifted. The story of the day, though unsaid, was clear. Their general had faced 6 enemies alone and emerged victorious. That story would grow, whispered through ranks, carried into barracks, told in quiet moments, as an example of courage, skill, and discipline. The legend of Alicia Hart was forming not in exaggeration, but in truth. She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the sun dipped low, gilding the ruins with molten light. She thought of the lives she had spared, not her enemies, for they had chosen their path, but her soldiers, her unit, the young faces who had looked to her for guidance. Every shot she had fired, every calculated movement she had made, had been to ensure their survival. Her reflections settled into a quiet understanding. Leadership was not about victory alone. It was about responsibility, about the burden of choice, about shaping the outcome when odds were against you. And she had done exactly that. A soft footstep drew her attention. One of her lieutenants approached, his expression hesitant, awed. "General, what now?" he asked. Alicia's eyes remained on the horizon. She breathed deeply, the weight of the day still pressing on her shoulders. She had survived, yes, but the war, as always, continued. "Now," she said quietly, voice steady, "we move forward, we rebuild, we prepare, and we remember. The lesson isn't in the kills, it's in control, patience, and resolve. Never forget that." Her lieutenant nodded, understanding dawning. He would tell the story, but it would always begin and end with her, the general who had faced 6 enemies and prevailed. As night approached, Alicia allowed herself a brief moment of solitude. She walked among the ruins, rifle resting lightly against her shoulder, eyes scanning, mind cataloging. The village had been a trap, but she had turned it into her dominion. She had survived against impossible odds, not through luck, but through discipline, skill, and unwavering resolve. The sun set fully, casting shadows that stretched long and dark across the battlefield. Alicia paused, breathing in the cool evening air, listening to the faint murmurs of her soldiers settling nearby. She had faced 6 enemies alone and emerged victorious. She had fired 6 perfect shots, and she had lived. Her thoughts turned to the future, the missions ahead, the soldiers under her command, the battles yet to come. She understood, as she always had, that every encounter was a lesson, every engagement a test of mind and body. The story of today would travel far, whispered in mess halls, recounted in training, remembered as proof that discipline, patience, and resolve could triumph against overwhelming odds. Alicia Hart, general, sniper, survivor, the legend would live on. She rose, fully, rifle in hand, moving toward her soldiers. They followed her lead, their movements steadier, more confident, inspired by her example. The battlefield, once a trap, was now a testament. The silence after the storm was not emptiness, it was legacy. And Alicia Hart, standing amidst ruins, dust, and fading sunlight, knew one immutable truth: a leader's courage does not end in victory. It echoes through those who witness it, shaping generations, creating legends. As she led her soldiers onward, she understood that her story, born from a single fateful trap, had already begun to transcend her. It would be told, retold, and remembered. 6 enemies, 1 general, 6 perfect shots, survival, mastery, and legend. And the legend lived on.